He can't even see it, the little rich boy, the line cook muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Leo Sinclair's chicken parmesan lay abandoned, a culinary crime scene. His old man Arthur was too busy closing some deal on his phone to notice his blind son quietly losing it. Rage coiled in my gut. This wasn't just about the damn chicken. See, I knew something they didn't. Leo wasn't just hungry for food. He was starving for connection, for someone to see him. Arthur Sinclair thought throwing money at the problem would fix it, but money can't buy what Leo really needed, what I could offer. Compassion. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything, and God knows they need it. He can't even see it, the little rich boy, the line cook muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Leo Sinclair's chicken parmesan lay abandoned, a culinary crime scene. His old man Arthur was too busy closing some deal on his phone to notice his blind son quietly losing it. Rage coiled in my gut. This wasn't just about the damn chicken. See, I knew something they didn't. Leo wasn't just hungry for food. He was starving for connection, for someone to see him. Arthur Sinclair thought throwing money at the problem would fix it, but money can't buy what Leo really needed, what I could offer. Compassion. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything, and God knows they need it. Arthur Sinclair. The name hung heavy in Manhattan's rarefied air, a monument to ambition and cold, hard cash. His skyscrapers clawed at the sky, monuments to his empire. But inside the penthouse, at the very top of one of those glass and steel behemoths, Arthur was trapped, haunted, by a tragedy that not even his billions could undo. 3 years ago, rain had slickened the asphalt on a Hamptons back road. A split-second skid, the screech of tires, and then nothing. His wife, Elena, vibrant, alive, was gone. And Leo, his bright, curious son, was plunged into a world of unending darkness. Blinded, the Park Avenue penthouse, once filled with Elena's laughter and the colorful chaos of Leo's childhood, became a mausoleum. The silence was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the hushed footsteps of the staff who moved like ghosts through the sterile rooms. Every object was carefully curated, obsessively clean, a desperate attempt to impose order on a world that had spun violently out of control. Arthur retreated. He dove headfirst into the familiar, predictable world of Sinclair Global Enterprises, losing himself in spreadsheets and board meetings. Numbers were logical. Deals were tangible. Fatherhood, especially to a son who couldn't see him, was an equation he couldn't solve. He provided, of course, the best tutors, the most advanced technology, therapists flown in from Europe. But what Leo truly craved, a connection, a father who saw him, not just his disability, remained tragically out of reach. Their interactions were formal, stilted. Breakfast was a ritual of quiet desperation, the clinking of silverware a jarring counterpoint to the unspoken grief that filled the room. Dinners were often skipped altogether. Arthur couldn't bear to look at Leo, at the constant, aching reminder of everything he had lost. He saw Elena in Leo's gentle features, his artistic spirit. He saw his own failure, his inability to protect them. And so, he distanced himself, mistaking cold efficiency for protection. On this particular Tuesday, a rare gap in Arthur's suffocating schedule appeared. A canceled meeting in Hong Kong left him adrift, a ship without a sail in a sea of empty hours. The housekeeper had the night off. He found himself standing outside Leo's door, a sterile space filled with expensive gadgets and textured learning tools, yet utterly devoid of warmth. Leo was listening to an audiobook, his small frame swallowed by the oversized bed. "Leo?" Arthur's voice was stiff, formal. "We'll be dining out tonight." Leo paused the recording, his face turned toward the door, though his eyes remained fixed on the unseen. "Okay, Dad." The words were flat, devoid of the enthusiasm a child should possess. Arthur chose the Gilded Sparrow, a small, unassuming Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, a place he hadn't visited since Elena was alive. She had loved the place, drawn to its authentic, unpretentious atmosphere. Why he chose it now he couldn't say. Perhaps a desperate attempt at absolution. The drive downtown was silent, the only sound the hum of the engine and the gentle patter of rain against the windshield. Arthur scrolled through market reports, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his phone. Leo stared straight ahead, his sightless eyes focused on a landscape only he could perceive. The gilded sparrow was a sensory explosion, a stark contrast to the hushed austerity of their penthouse. The aroma of garlic and simmering tomatoes hung thick in the air. The murmur of conversations and the clatter of dishes, a comforting cacophony. They were seated in a quiet corner booth, Arthur immediately defaulting to his usual posture. Phone on the table, a silent barrier between him and the world. "I'll order for you," he stated, not asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. He chose the chicken parmesan for Leo, a safe, predictable choice, a filet mignon for himself. When the food arrived, the charade began. This was the part Arthur dreaded, the stark, agonizing display of their brokenness. Leo, fiercely independent, insisted on feeding himself, but navigating a plate of pasta and chicken with a fork and knife he couldn't see was a frustrating, humiliating ordeal. A chunk of chicken slipped from his fork and bounced onto the floor. A forkful of spaghetti missed its target, leaving a smear of tomato sauce on his cheek. Leo's shoulders tensed, his face flushed with shame. "I'm not hungry," he mumbled, pushing his plate away. Arthur felt a flash of impatience, quickly masked by his usual icy detachment. "Just eat, Leo. We don't have all night." He didn't even glance up from his phone, his thumb still flicking across the screen. A lucrative deal in Tokyo beckoned, a far more comfortable distraction than the slow-motion disaster unfolding at his own table. He didn't see the tears welling in his son's eyes, didn't hear the choked sob that Leo desperately tried to stifle. But someone did. Across the bustling restaurant, a waitress named Clara Ara Evans was clearing a nearby table. 24, with kind hazel eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Every muscle in her body ached, the dull throb a constant reminder of the double shift she was working to cover, the overdue rent, and send a little extra money to her younger brother Sam for his college textbooks. Clara Ara had noticed the man and the boy the moment they'd walked in. It was a skill honed by years of serving, a subtle art of observation. She could spot the first daters, the anniversary celebrants, the overwhelmed tourists. She saw the father, radiating an aura of cold power, lost in his phone. And she saw the boy, handsome but heartbreakingly sad, struggling not just with his food, but with the palpable chasm between him and his father. Her heart twisted. She knew that kind of loneliness. She watched as he pushed his plate away, as the father offered nothing but a dismissive command. And in that moment, a quiet resolve hardened within her. She grabbed a clean napkin, took a deep breath, and walked towards their table. Clara Ara approached not as a waitress, but as a human being. She ignored the formidable presence of Arthur Sinclair, whose sharp gaze flickered up from his phone, annoyed by the interruption. Her focus remained entirely on the small, dejected figure in the booth. She knelt, bringing herself to eye level with Leo. Her voice was soft, gentle, like a melody cutting through the restaurant's noise. "Hi there," she began, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "My name is Clara Ara. I couldn't help but notice you're not a big fan of that chicken parmesan." Leo flinched, anticipating a reprimand or an order to clean up the mess. He kept his head down. "It's fine." "I don't believe you," Clara Ara said playfully. "I think that chicken is giving you a hard time. Sometimes food can be a bit of a bully." The unexpected turn of phrase made Leo lift his head slightly, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Arthur finally lowered his phone, his eyes narrowed. "What is the meaning of this? If there's a problem, I'll handle it." His voice was low, laced with a cold steel that usually sent people scrambling. Clara Ara met his gaze without flinching, but her response was directed at Leo. "No problem at all, sir. I just have a theory. My little brother Sam, he always says, you can't properly enjoy a meal unless you know exactly what you're up against. It's like a delicious little battle plan." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Would you mind if I described the battlefield for you?" Leo was silent for a moment, then gave a hesitant, almost imperceptible nod. Arthur watched, stunned. No one spoke to him like that. No one interrupted him, much less his family, with such calm audacity. He was about to summon the manager to have this impertinent waitress fired when something held him back. Curiosity. He watched. Clara Ara gently took a clean fork. "All right," she said, her voice painting a picture with words. "Let's start with the plate itself. Think of it like a clock face, right? At the very top, at 12 o'clock, that's where the biggest piece of chicken is hiding. It's crispy on the outside, but super tender on the inside, and it's covered in this warm, melted mozzarella cheese." She lightly tapped the plate with the fork at the 12 o'clock position. "Feel that?" Leo nodded, a little more firmly this time. "Good. Now from about 3 o'clock all the way to 7 o'clock, you've got a mountain of spaghetti. The noodles are tangled up in this really rich tomato sauce. My grandmother's recipe, the secret ingredient is a tiny pinch of cinnamon. Don't tell the chef I told you." She winked even though she knew he couldn't see it. The warmth in her voice was enough. A tiny smile touched Leo's lips. It was the first time Arthur had seen him smile all week. A gut punch. "And over here," Clara Ara continued, tapping near 9 o'clock, "is a little sprig of parsley. It's mostly for decoration, so you can ignore him. He's the snooty guy at the party who doesn't talk to anyone." Leo actually laughed, a real, genuine laugh. The sound was so foreign, so beautiful, that it struck Arthur like a physical blow, tightening his throat. Clara Ara then placed the fork in Leo's hand. "Now you're the general. You know the terrain. Where would you like to start your attack?" "The chicken," Leo whispered. "At 12 o'clock. "Excellent choice," Clara Ara said with the gravity of a military strategist. She gently guided his other hand to where the knife lay. "Your knife is your best soldier. Use the fork to hold the enemy in place, and the knife to, well, you know." Over the next 10 minutes, Arthur Sinclair, titan of industry, sat silently and watched a waitress he'd barely registered do what an army of therapists and tutors had failed to accomplish. She gave his son dignity. She didn't feed him. She didn't pity him. She empowered him. She turned a plate of food into a game, a map, an adventure. She conversed with him, asking about his audiobook, what music he liked, all while offering quiet guidance. "A little to the left, there you go." Leo ate his entire meal. He even laughed again when Clara Ara told him he'd successfully conquered the Parmesan. When he was done, he had only a tiny smudge of sauce on his chin. Clara Ara gently wiped it away with a napkin. "There," she said softly, "victory is yours." For the first time that evening, Leo turned his head in the direction of his father. "Dad," he said, his voice clearer, stronger than Arthur had heard in months. "Her name is Clara Ara." Arthur could only nod, his own voice lost. He looked at Clara Ara, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, but he also saw an incredible, luminous spark of empathy. He saw the frayed cuff of her uniform sleeve and the small faded stain on her apron. He saw a person who, despite her own struggles, possessed an abundance of a currency he was bankrupt in. Human kindness. When she stood up and gave them a professional but warm smile, preparing to leave, Arthur found his voice. "Wait," he commanded, the word rougher than he intended. He reached for his wallet, pulling out several $100 bills. "For your trouble." Clara Ara looked at the money in his hand and then back at his face. A flicker of something, disappointment, crossed her features. She gently pushed his hand back. "That's not necessary, sir." Seeing him smile was more than enough tip for me. She glanced at Leo. "It was a pleasure dining with you, General." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. Arthur Sinclair sat there, the crisp bills still clutched in his hand, feeling utterly and completely checkmated. He had just witnessed a miracle, and his first instinct had been to try and buy it. He looked at his son, who was sitting up straighter, a faint smile still lingering on his lips. For the first time in 3 years, the silence between them didn't feel like an empty chasm. It felt thoughtful. He had a problem far bigger than any corporate takeover, and he had the strangest feeling he had just met the solution. But the solution had refused his money. This was a language he didn't understand, and he was determined to learn it. The next morning, the gears of the Sinclair empire shifted to focus on a new, highly unusual target, Clara Ara Evans. Arthur didn't become a billionaire by being sentimental. His reaction in the restaurant, a mix of awe, guilt, and curiosity, had been processed overnight. Emotion was a liability. Action was an asset, and the first action was always to gather intelligence. He summoned his head of security, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient man named Marcus Harrison. Harrison had been with Arthur for 15 years. A former MI6 agent, he handled everything from corporate espionage to keeping Arthur's personal life hermetically sealed from the press. A ghost, a man whose entire job was to know things others didn't. They met in Arthur's home office, a vast room of mahogany and black leather overlooking Central Park. The morning sun streamed in, but the atmosphere remained cold. "I have a name," Arthur said, getting straight to the point as he poured himself a black coffee. "Clara Ara Evans. She's a waitress at the Gilded Sparrow in the village." Harrison, standing silently by the desk, simply nodded, pen poised over a small notebook. "This is not a typical assignment. I want to know everything about her," Arthur continued, his back to Harrison as he stared out the window. "And I mean everything. Where she lives, her family, her financial situation, debts, assets, the works, education, employment history, social circle. I want to know what she dreams about at night and what she's afraid of when she wakes up. I want a complete picture." He turned, his gaze sharp and commanding. "But Marcus, you will be invisible. She is not to know she's being watched. No one is. Is that clear?" "Perfectly, Mr. Sinclair," Harrison replied, his voice a dry whisper. "Discretion is assured." Timeline? 48 hours. For the next 2 days, Marcus Harrison's invisible network went to work, expertly navigating the digital and physical breadcrumbs people leave behind. Arthur, for all his ruthlessness in business, had a strict personal code about breaking the law, so they didn't hack or break in. Harrison's methods were more nuanced. Public records, social media deep dives, conversations with former neighbors, landlords, and colleagues under plausible pretexts. The file that landed on Arthur's desk 48 hours later was slim, but dense with the details of a life lived on the edge of collapse. Subject: Clara Ara Ann Evans. Age 24. Address: 4th floor walk-up in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Rent: $12800 month, currently 1 week past due. Financials: checking account balance, $8714. Savings account, $12.50. Credit card debt, $6,245. Outstanding student loan debt, $48,000. Family: mother Sarah Evans, deceased 18 months ago, pancreatic cancer. Father: unknown. Sibling: Samuel, Sam Evans, age 19. The report went on. Education: accepted into Rhode Island School of Design, ISD, on a partial scholarship, class of 2023. Dropped out after her first year due to mother's diagnosis. The scholarship was contingent on continuous enrollment. Employment history: waitress at the Gilded Sparrow, 2 years. Prior to that, various service industry jobs, barista, bookstore clerk. Impeccable record, never late, never a complaint. Known for being hardworking and kind to colleagues. Notable information: the bulk of her credit card debt stems from her mother's uninsured medical expenses. She sends approximately $300 a month to her brother Sam, a sophomore studying engineering at SUNY Buffalo, who is unaware of the extent of her financial struggles. Social media presence: minimal. Private Instagram account with 57 followers, mostly photos of art, her cat, a ginger tabby named Marmalade, and her brother. No photos of parties, boyfriends, or extravagant purchases. Last entry in a personal blog, dated 2 years ago. Sometimes I feel like I'm holding my breath, waiting for the moment I can finally pick up a paintbrush again. But right now, family has to be the masterpiece. Arthur read the report 3 times, a knot tightening in his stomach. This wasn't the profile of an opportunist, of a grifter looking for a rich mark. This was the story of a young woman who had sacrificed her dreams on the altar of family, who was quietly drowning in debt and responsibility, and who, despite it all, had found the grace to kneel on a dirty restaurant floor to help a stranger's child. The line from her blog: family has to be the masterpiece. resonated with painful irony. He, who had every resource imaginable, had treated his family like a failed business venture to be written off. She, with nothing, had made it her entire world. He thought about the moment she had refused his money. It hadn't been prideful defiance. He saw it clearly now. It had been an act of principle. She had offered human connection, and he had responded with a transaction. She wasn't rejecting his money. She was rejecting his entire worldview. He closed the file. The investigation had answered his questions, but it had also posed a new, far more difficult one. What do you offer a person who has nothing, yet seems to possess the one thing you've lost? His mind, accustomed to complex deal-making, began to formulate a new kind of proposal. It couldn't be charity. Her profile suggested she would reject it outright. It had to be a transaction, but a meaningful one. It had to be an offer that solved a problem for both of them. He needed someone to break through the walls he and Leo had built. She needed a lifeline. He picked up his phone, not to check stock prices, but to call the reservation line at the Gilded Sparrow. "I'd like to book a table for 2 for tonight," he said, "and I have a special request. I'd like to ensure our server is Clara." He was done observing. It was time to act. The evening air was thick with humidity as Clara navigated the crowded subway back to her apartment. Her feet throbbed, her apron smelled of vinaigrette, and her mind was a whirlwind of anxieties. The rent was late. Sam had casually mentioned a required engineering software that cost $200. Her landlord, Mr. Petro, had left another note on her door, this one less polite than the last. She felt like she was running on a treadmill, sprinting as fast as she could just to stay in the same place. Amidst the stress, the memory of the boy in the restaurant surfaced. Leo. She remembered the small, hesitant smile that had transformed his face. For a few brief minutes, she had felt a sense of purpose that went beyond delivering plates and refilling water glasses. It was a fleeting but powerful feeling. When she arrived at work the next day, her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, pulled her aside. "Evans," he said, wiping his brow. "Table 7, the corner booth. They're asking for you specifically." Clara's heart sank. Specific requests usually meant one of two things: a customer with a crush, which was always awkward, or a customer with a complaint from a previous visit. She braced herself and walked towards the booth. It was them. The man with the storm-gray eyes and his quiet, blind son. Arthur Sinclair was not on his phone this time. He was sitting opposite Leo, and the table between them was empty except for 2 glasses of water. His entire focus was on her as she approached. An unnerving level of attention, intense and analytical, as if he were trying to read the fine print of her soul. "Good evening," Clara said, her voice professionally steady, despite the tremor of nerves she felt. "Welcome back to the Gilded Sparrow. It's nice to see you again, Leo." She made sure to address the boy first. Leo's head turned toward the sound of her voice, and a genuine, happy smile lit up his face. "Clara, you're here." "I am here," she confirmed warmly. "What can I get for you gentlemen tonight?" "We are not here to eat, Ms. Evans," Arthur stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gestured to the seat beside his son. "Please sit down. I would like to have a conversation with you. I will compensate you for your time, and I've already cleared it with your manager." Clara froze. This was highly unusual. Sitting with a customer was against every rule in the book. But the look on the man's face, combined with Sal's frantic nodding from across the room, told her this was not a request. She hesitantly slid into the booth next to Leo. "My name is Arthur Sinclair," he said formally, extending a hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and cool. "And this is my son, Leo. It's a pleasure to meet you both properly," she replied, her mind racing. "What could this possibly be about, Ms. Evans?" Arthur leaned forward slightly. "I am a man who believes in efficiency and directness. I don't deal in pleasantries when business is at hand. What I witnessed you do for my son 2 nights ago was remarkable." Clara felt a blush creep up her neck. "I was just doing my job, trying to be helpful." "No," Arthur corrected her instantly. "Your job is to take orders and deliver food. What you did was something else entirely. You connected with him. You gave him confidence. In 10 minutes, you accomplished more than a team of specialists has in 3 years. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Leo has been blind since he was 7. His mother passed away in the same accident. Since then, a wall has existed between us. I have been unable to breach it. The admission was stark, stripped of emotion, but it was a confession nonetheless, a crack in his formidable armor. I'm so sorry, Clara whispered, her heart going out to the boy beside her. Arthur waved her sympathy away with a flick of his wrist. I am not looking for pity, Miss Evans. I am looking for a solution. I want to offer you a job. Clara blinked, completely thrown. A job? I have a job. A different kind of job, he clarified. I want you to become Leo's companion. Not a nurse, not a governess in the traditional sense. A guide, a friend, someone to help him navigate the world, to re-engage with it. Someone to do for him what you did in this restaurant. Translate the world into a language he can understand. He then laid out the terms, a business proposition, clear and cold. Your duties would include accompanying him after school, assisting with his engagement in non-academic activities, hobbies, experiences. I want you to help him discover art through touch, music through theory, nature through scent and sound. The hours would be from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., Monday to Friday. You would work out of my home. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. And this would be your salary. Clara's hand trembled as she picked it up. She unfolded it and saw a number. It wasn't just a salary. It was a figure so large it didn't seem real. It was more than she made in 3 years of working double shifts of sore feet and endless anxiety. It was enough to pay off her debts, her mother's medical bills, her student loans. It was enough to ensure Sam could finish his degree without ever worrying about money again. It was a lifeline. It was a fantasy, and it terrified her. Why me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You could hire anyone, someone with degrees, with qualifications in child development or special needs education. I have, Arthur said flatly. I have hired the best. They see Leo as a patient, a case study, a disability. You saw a 10-year-old boy who couldn't eat his dinner. Your qualification, Miss Evans, is your humanity. It's something that cannot be taught at any university. Evans is your humanity. It's something that cannot be taught at any university. Clara looked at Leo, who had been listening intently. He reached out a small hand, his fingers brushing against her arm. Please, Clara, he asked, his voice soft and hopeful. Her defenses crumbled. She looked back at the number on the paper, a figure that represented freedom. Then she looked at the hopeful face of a lonely little boy. The money was life-changing, but it was his plea that sealed the deal. How could she say no? But she was no fool. This world of unimaginable wealth was foreign and dangerous. On a trial basis, she heard herself say the words sounding more confident than she felt. 1 month to see if it's a good fit for all of us? Arthur Sinclair leaned back, a flicker of something that might have been respect in his eyes. He had expected her to be overwhelmed, to gush with gratitude. Instead, she was negotiating. 1 month, he agreed with a crisp nod. You'll start on Monday. My driver will pick you up. My assistant will be in touch with a contract and the necessary paperwork. The meeting was over. He stood and Leo stood with him. As they were about to leave, Clara spoke one last time. Mr. Sinclair, he turned. There's one condition, she said, her gaze firm. When I'm with Leo, you can't be on your phone. For the second time in their acquaintance, Arthur Sinclair was rendered speechless. He simply stared at her, then gave a single sharp nod of assent before turning and guiding his son out of the restaurant. Clara remained in the booth, the piece of paper clutched in her hand. The cacophony of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. Her life had just taken a turn so sharp and unexpected. She felt a profound sense of vertigo. She didn't know if she was stepping into a fairy tale or a trap. The Sinclair penthouse was less a home and more a monument to wealth and sorrow. It was a vast expanse of white marble, black furniture, and floor-to, siling windows that displayed the city like a piece of untouchable art. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint, sterile scent of lemon polish. It was beautiful, impeccable, and completely devoid of life. On her first day, Clara felt like an intruder, her worn-out canvas tote bag, a glaring anomaly in the pristine environment. Leo met her at the door, guided by the housekeeper, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Gable, who looked at Clara Ara with thinly veiled suspicion. Clara Ara. Leo's voice echoed in the cavernous foyer. He was smiling, a rare and precious sight. "Hey, Leo," Clara Ara smiled back, forcing a warmth she didn't feel in the cold space. "Ready for our first adventure." "Where are we going?" he asked, his excitement palpable. "Nowhere," Clara Ara replied, dropping her tote bag to the floor with a soft thud. "The adventure is coming to us?" Clara Ara understood that before she could show Leo the world, she had to help him build one of his own. Her first purchase, with the generous advance Arthur had insisted upon, was not clothes or luxuries for herself, but a massive consignment of art supplies. Huge tubs of modeling clay textured paints mixed with sand and glitter canvases of all sizes, and thick, rough-grained paper. She spread a huge canvas drop cloth on the floor of the formal living room, much to the horror of Mrs. Gable. "Our mission today," she announced to Leo, "is to paint a sunset. But we're not going to paint what it looks like. We're going to paint what it full feels like." She guided his hands to different pots of paint. "This one," she said, dipping his fingers into a thick, gritty orange. "This is the warmth of the sun on your skin, just before it disappears. It feels a little rough, like a warm blanket." She moved his hand to a smooth, cool pot of dark blue. "And this is the evening sky taking over. It's cool and smooth, like the feeling of the air changing. For the next 2 hours, they didn't paint with brushes, they painted with their hands." Leo, hesitant at first, soon lost himself in the sensory experience. He smeared the warm orange and the cool blue, laughing as the gritty and smooth textures mixed under his fingers. He was not just painting, he was experiencing. For the first time, art was not something to be seen on a wall, but something to be felt and understood. Arthur came home that evening to a sight that stopped him in his tracks. His immaculate living room, a space normally reserved for stoic business meetings, was covered in a plastic sheet. In the center of it, his son and the waitress were sitting on the floor, both covered in paint, laughing. Leo had a smear of purple across his cheek, and his face was alight with a joy Arthur hadn't seen since before the accident. The air, usually sterile, smelled of wet paint and something else. Happiness. He didn't say a word. He just stood in the doorway and watched a strange, tight feeling in his chest. Clara Ara's sessions with Leo became the highlight of the boy's existence. They baked cookies, focusing on the smell of cinnamon and vanilla and the changing texture of the dough. They went to Central Park, where Clara Ara didn't describe the trees but had Leo hug one to feel the rough bark and the sheer size of it. She taught him to identify different birds by their songs. She was rewiring his world, building it back up with the senses he had left. And slowly, cautiously, Arthur began to be drawn into their orbit. He started coming home from work earlier. At first, he would just observe from a distance. Then, prompted by Clara Ara's gentle but firm condition, he began to join them. He would sit phone put away and simply listen as Clara Ara described the shape of a cloud or the plot of a movie they were watching with audio description. One evening, he found them in the kitchen making pizza from scratch. Leo was kneading the dough, a dusting of flour on his nose. "Dad," Leo said, his head turning towards the sound of Arthur's footsteps. "Clara Ara says the secret to good dough is to punch it. You want to try?" Before he could refuse, Clara Ara was washing his hands at the sink, rolling up the sleeves of his thousand shirt. "The general requires reinforcements," she said with a grin. And so Arthur Sinclair, a man who could command boardrooms and move markets with a single phone call, found himself inexpertly punching a lump of dough on his marble countertop. He was clumsy and awkward, but when Leo heard the thud of the dough and let out a peal of laughter, Arthur felt a crackle of warmth spread through his chest. He was not just observing his son's happiness. For the first time, he was a part of it. The penthouse began to change. A lopsided clay pot Leo had made now sat on a mahogany side table. A chaotic, colorful painting of a sunset was hung at Leo's insistence in the main hallway. The house was no longer a silent museum. It had a heartbeat. But as the light and laughter began to return to the Sinclair home, a shadow was lengthening in the periphery. Not everyone was pleased with this new arrangement. The shadow had a name, Catherine Vance. She was Ella Lenena's younger sister, Leo's aunt. She was a woman who wore her grief like a designer gown, elegantly but for all to see. She was a permanent fixture in the orbit of Sinclair's wealth, managing one of the family's charitable foundations, and seeing herself as the protector of Elelena's legacy, and by extension, Leo's well-being. She arrived unannounced one afternoon, letting herself in with her own key. She found Clara, Ara, and Leo in the music room, Clara Ara teaching him the basic chords on Elelena's old grand piano. Catherine stopped dead, her perfectly made-up face hardening into a mask of disapproval. "And who might you be?" she asked, her voice dripping with ice. "This is Clara Ara, Aunt Catherine," Leo said, his hand still on the keys. "She's my friend." Catherine's eyes swept over Clara, taking in her simple jeans and t-shirt. She saw not a friend, but a threat, a common, unremarkable girl who had somehow managed to infiltrate this fortress of wealth and grief. "I see," Catherine said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Arthur failed to mention he had hired new staff. The word was an insult. From that moment on, Catherine saw Clara as a usurper, a gold digger preying on a grieving man and a vulnerable child. She was convinced Clara was manipulating her way into the family, trying to replace the irreplaceable Elelena. And Catherine Vance would do anything to protect her sister's memory and her own position within the family. She began to watch, to listen, to search for a weakness, a crack in Clara's armor. She was determined to expose the girl for the fraud she was certain she was, and destroy her. Catherine Vance was a master of the subtle attack. Her weapons were not raised voices and overt accusations, but poisoned whispers, manufactured concerns, and carefully planted seeds of doubt. She began by calling Arthur, her voice laced with feigned worry. "Arthur, darling, I'm just a little concerned. This Clara girl, we know nothing about her. A waitress in charge of my nephew Elelena would be so worried. Have you done a background check? I'd hate for Leo to get attached to someone unsuitable." Arthur, who had indeed done the most thorough background check imaginable, brushed her off. "Clara is perfectly suitable. Catherine Leo is thriving. His dismissal only fueled her resolve. If a direct approach wouldn't work, she would resort to sabotage. Catherine knew Arthur's deepest wound was his guilt over Elelena's death. It was a vulnerability she could exploit. She started her campaign by finding things. A bill for an art supply store left on a table. "My goodness, Arthur, is this what she's spending your money on?" It seems rather extravagant. A conversation she overheard where Clara was on the phone with her brother Sam, promising him she'd help with his tuition. She relayed this to Arthur as it sounds like she has a great deal of financial pressure. People in those situations can sometimes be desperate. Clara was oblivious to the web being spun around her. Her world was consumed by Leo. She was celebrating his victories the first time he successfully navigated the apartment by himself. The day he finished reading his first book in Braille, the afternoon he composed a simple, beautiful melody on the piano. She was also growing more comfortable around Arthur. The stilted formality had melted away, replaced by a quiet, easy camaraderie. They would often talk after Leo was in bed, sharing stories about their lives. He learned about her dream of being an artist, and she saw glimpses of the man he was before grief had hollowed him out. The centerpiece of Catherine's plan involved something precious, one of Elena's favorite sapphire earrings. It wasn't the most valuable piece of jewelry Elena owned, but it was deeply sentimental. Arthur had given it to her on their first anniversary. After her death, he had kept the pair in a small, unlocked velvet box in his desk drawer, a private memorial he couldn't bear to put away. Catherine, during one of her frequent unannounced visits, expertly palmed one of the earrings. A few days later, she orchestrated her final dramatic scene. She arrived at the penthouse in the late afternoon, her face a mask of distress. Arthur had just gotten home and was in his office. Clara and Leo were in the living room, building a city out of Lego. "Arthur." Catherine's voice was sharp with panic as she burst into his office. "Arthur, it's gone." "What's gone, Catherine?" he asked, looking up from his paperwork, annoyed. "Elena's sapphire earring. The one you gave her. I just wanted to look at it, to feel close to her, and there's only one in the box." Her performance was flawless. Tears welled in her eyes. "Someone must have taken it." Arthur's blood ran cold. He immediately went to the desk, his hands rifling through the velvet box. She was right. One was missing. It must have been one of the cleaning staff, he said, his mind racing. Oh, Arthur, be realistic, Catherine said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, planting the poison. They've all been with you for years. Nothing has ever gone missing. What's the only thing that's changed in this house in the last month? She didn't have to say the name. Clara Ara, the waitress with thousands in debt, the girl who was on the phone promising her brother money. The pieces so carefully arranged by Catherine clicked into place in Arthur's mind. His old cynical, mistrustful self roared back to the surface. He had allowed himself to be vulnerable, to trust this stranger, and this was the result. The kindness he had witnessed, the bond with his son. Was it all just an elaborate act? A long con? The rage and betrayal felt like ice in his veins. He stormed out of the office and into the living room. Catherine following her face, a picture of tragic concern. Clara Ara. His voice was like a whip crack. Clara Ara and Leo both jumped. Clara Ara had never heard him use that tone before. It was the voice of the cold, ruthless billionaire she had first met. Empty your pockets and your bag, he commanded, his face a thunderous mask. Clara Ara stared at him, utterly bewildered. What, Mr. Sinclair? What's going on? Don't play dumb with me. My wife's earring is missing. A sapphire earring. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Clara Ara felt the blood drain from her face. She looked from Arthur's accusing glare to Catherine's triumphant, pitying gaze. She understood instantly. This was a setup. I would never, she stammered, her voice trembling. You can't possibly believe I would steal from you. I believe you are a young woman with significant debt who was given access to my home. He retorted coldly. It's a simple, logical conclusion. Tears of disbelief and hurt stung Clara Ara's eyes. It wasn't the accusation that wounded her so deeply, but the fact that he could believe it. After everything they had shared, after all the progress Leo had made, he still saw her as the sum of her financial problems. Leo, go to your room, Arthur ordered. No. Leo's voice was surprisingly strong. He stood up. His small hands clenched into fists and moved to stand next to Clara Ara, as if to shield her. She didn't do it. Clara Ara wouldn't do that. Leo, this is an adult matter. Go to your room now. Arthur repeated, his voice dangerously low. No. Lau shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. You're always like this. You always think the worst of everyone. Clara Ara is the only one who sees me. You were happy. We were happy. And now Aunt Catherine is here, and you're ruining it. Leo's defense, so fierce and unwavering, struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw not a naive child, but a person with clear, sharp judgment. He saw a boy defending the only source of light that had entered his world in 3 years. Then he looked at Clara. She was no longer trembling. Her back was straight, and though tears streamed down her face, her eyes met his with a look of profound, dignified hurt. You can search my bag, Mr. Sinclair, she said, her voice quiet but strong. You can search my apartment. You won't find anything. But know this, you've already found what you were looking for. You were looking for a reason to believe that kindness always has a price tag. You were looking for a reason to stay in your cold, safe world where you don't have to trust anyone. So congratulations, you found it. She bent down and gave Leo a hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered into his hair. Then she stood, picked up her simple canvas tote bag, and walked toward the door. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just left. The sound of the door closing echoed in the sudden, crushing silence. Arthur was left standing with his weeping, furious son and his conniving sister-in-law. He looked at Catherine's face, which held a flicker of victory, and then at Leo's, which was a mask of utter devastation. In that moment, Arthur Sinclair felt the full crushing weight of his mistake. He had just extinguished the only light in his house to protect a trinket, all based on the word of a woman who thrived on drama and an old, cynical belief system that had brought him nothing but misery. The logical conclusion he'd been so proud of suddenly seemed like the most profound stupidity of his life. The silence that descended upon the penthouse after Clara Ara's departure was heavier and more suffocating than ever before. Leo refused to speak to his father. He took the vibrant tactile painting they had made off the wall and retreated into his room, shutting the door on a world that had once again lost its color. Arthur was left alone with the ghost of his own happiness. Leo's words echoed in his mind. You always think the worst of everyone? You were happy, we were happy. The truth of it was an agony. He had been happy. For the first time in 3 years, he had felt the ice around his heart begin to thaw. He had laughed, he had played, he had connected with his son, and at the first test, at the first whisper of doubt from a manipulative source, he had shattered it all. He hadn't just accused an innocent woman, he had betrayed his son's trust, and in doing so betrayed himself. His gaze fell upon Catherine, who was attempting to comfort him with platitudes. You did the right thing, Arthur. You have to be careful. Suddenly his grief-fogged mind cleared, and he saw her with horrifying clarity. He saw the petty jealousies, the constant need to be the center of his grieving world, the way she had always subtly undermined Elena's confidence. He looked at her in a cold, precise anger, the kind he usually reserved for the boardroom, took hold. Get out, he said, his voice quiet and deadly. Catherine was taken aback. What, Arthur? I was only trying to help. I know exactly what you were trying to do. He cut her off his eyes like chips of ice. You saw this family healing, and you couldn't stand it. You saw a light in this house that wasn't a reflection of you or your sister, so you tried to snuff it out. Get out of my home, Catherine, and don't come back. He walked to his desk and pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police. He called Marcus Harrison. I need you to find something, Marcus. Urgently, a single sapphire earring. Check every pawn shop, every high-end reseller within a 50-mile radius, and run a full financial workup on Catherine Vance. I want to know where every single dollar she has comes from and where it goes. The results came back in less than 24 hours. Harrison Ever-Efficient had found the earring. It hadn't been pawned. It had been discovered by Catherine tucked away in a coat pocket with a dramatic, tearful phone call to one of her society friends. A call Harrison's operative had overheard. The financial report was even more damning. The charitable foundation she managed was a sieve with administrative fees and consulting expenses, funneling a significant amount of money directly into her accounts to fund a lifestyle far beyond her official means. She had been stealing from him in a far more profound way than taking a piece of jewelry for years. The earring was just a desperate gambit to remove Clara, whom she correctly identified as a threat to her influence and her secret income stream. Armed with the truth, Arthur felt no triumph, only a deep, hollow shame. He had allowed his own cynicism, expertly manipulated by Catherine, to destroy something beautiful. Now he had to try and rebuild it. He didn't send a driver or an assistant. He drove himself to Bushwick to the 4th-floor walk, uplisted in Harrison's file. He climbed the creaking stairs, the air smelling of dust and old cooking oil, a world away from his climate-controlled penthouse. He knocked on her door, his heart pounding like it was his first-ever business pitch. Clara Ara opened it. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. She wasn't surprised to see him. She just looked tired. Mr. Sinclair, she said, her voice flat. Clara, he began, his own voice sounding foreign and strained. There are no words to properly express how sorry I am. I was wrong. I was a fool. I know you didn't take the earring. I know what Catherine did. I let my worst instincts, my oldest fears, override everything I've seen and learned from you over this past month. He held out a small velvet box. This belongs to you, he said. Inside wasn't the earring, but a set of keys. It's a studio space in Dumbo overlooking the river. The lease is paid for 5 years. There's also an endowment, the Sarah Evans Grant, set up at Rusty. It will provide a full scholarship each year to a student who had to leave for family reasons. The first recipient is you whenever you're ready to go back. Your brother's education is also taken care of completely. Clara Ara stared at the keys, her eyes welling up with tears. This was everything she had ever dreamed of, everything she had sacrificed. This is not a payment for what I did to you, Arthur said quickly, seeing the hesitation in her face. There is no price for that. This is me trying to restore something that should never have been taken from you in the first place. It's an apology, the only one I know how to make. And Leo, she asked, her voice thick with emotion. How is he? He's broken. Arthur admitted the words costing him dearly, and I'm the one who broke him. He needs you, Clara Ara. I know I have no right to ask, but I need you too. You didn't just teach my son how to navigate a plate of food. You taught me how to be a father again. You brought our family back to life. Please come back, not as an employee, as a part of our lives. Clara looked past him down the dingy hallway and saw the life of struggle she was so accustomed to. Then she looked at the keys in her hand, a future she never thought possible. But more powerfully, she thought of Leo alone in his silent dark room. A small smile touched her lips. I have one condition, Arthur. He held his breath. Anything. The three of us. We're going to repaint that sunset picture, and this time you're not allowed to use brushes either. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over Arthur Sinclair. He nodded a genuine, unforced smile, reaching his eyes for the first time in years. It's a deal. The Sinclair penthouse was never the same again. It became a home filled with the smell of paint and baking, the sound of piano music, and the constant, joyful noise of laughter. Clara Ara went back to school, her talent finally unleashed, but she never truly left them. She became the vibrant, steady heart of their small, unconventional family. Arthur learned to see the world not through the lens of a balance sheet, but through Clara's descriptions and Leo's experiences. He learned that true wealth wasn't in a stock portfolio, but in the trust of his son and the warmth of a shared meal. Together, the three of them, the billionaire who had everything, the boy who saw with his heart, and the waitress who gave all she had, created a new masterpiece, a life richer and more beautiful than any of them could have ever imagined alone. The story of Arthur, Leo, and Clara reminds us that the most valuable things in life are never for sale. It shows us that beneath the surface of titles and bank accounts, we are all just people searching for connection, for healing, and for a second chance. A single act of kindness offered without expectation of reward truly did change three lives forever, proving that empathy is the one currency that can bridge any divide. It challenges us to look closer at the people around us, to see the person behind the uniform or the job title, and to never underestimate the power we have to bring light into someone's darkness. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the good in the world, please take a moment to click that like button. Share it with someone who might need a little hope today, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and uplift. What was your favorite moment in the story? Let us know in the comments below.